Now, I'm amazed that not more people seriously engage with this. Okay, you have, Chomsky-esque descriptions of the propaganda model of the role of the mainstream media. So do we accept that the traditional media industries and the way information that flows into it and flows out of it is a major element of the society that we live in? I think most people accept that. So what if that changes? Does that mean other things have to change as well? Of course it does. It's like if there was suddenly no money in society, no contracts in society, or no courts in society, would the rest of the social structure and the political structure change? Of course it would. And so we're moving forward into a different form of social relation that exists when there's not a traditional media monopoly. Okay, but so that's produced a great threat to existing power structures of various forms are terribly threatened by it, and it's not the case that social media is just going to stay there as it has been used in this election and the US election. That's absolutely not true. And it's possible we'll end up in a much worse position. So, okay, you've got, 5 big media barons here and trusts and the BBC. Okay, but what if we basically just have Facebook and Twitter? If it kind of evolves that, maybe Facebook, Twitter, and the BBC. Are we in a better position? No, we're potentially in a much worse position. What hasn't happened yet is Facebook and Twitter taking seriously how they can control and influence the other power structures that want them to control and influence. They've just started to do it. But we're going to move to a time when the various forms of artificial intelligence that are being developed at Google and being acquired by Facebook and a bit in China are going to be used to control or adjust perception. So if you imagine a Daily Mail not run by Paul Dacre, but run by purely or essentially by artificial intelligence, what does that look like when there's only the Daily Mail worldwide? So that's what Facebook and Twitter, I believe, will shift into. They must inevitably shift into that. There's already such intense pressures that Google and Facebook came out publicly and said that they were changing how they were behaving directly to deal with the French election. Essentially directly to make sure Macron won and Le Pen didn't, because they were getting such pressure from their, presumably their elite level connections from their staff and so on, to make sure she didn't win.
Right, we have 2 minutes left, 1 minute left.
Can I just make one sentence,
yes.
literally? What is so important, I would like to connect what Julian was saying.
He just hit the most interesting bit, which is talking about AI, and we're wrapping up. And
with your billionaire really, friends,
I know.
What game, what game they played. This is a game that many people play. I secretly know it, but I pretend not to know it. All the dirty things, Iraq war. And what WikiLeaks does is bring in the data. Sorry, fuck you, now you know it. You cannot, because many even of my friends say, yeah, Secret Services, Army.
Because it's not really written by anyone. It's literally the documents and it gets dropped.
Yeah, and those empowered, they cannot pretend that it's not sure, we don't know it. Now they know it.
Yeah, but is there a process of gatekeeping in what gets dropped and what doesn't? Because that's what the criticism is. That, yes, but the criticism to WikiLeaks is that there is a gatekeeping process.
That is true. There is. The process is it can't have been published before, and it has to be an authentic document. That's the process.
And it's not an opinion. It's just the fact.
Well, we also write analysis, but but the power, no one really cares about my analysis or WikiLeaks analysis. I mean, I'd like to believe they really care about it, but people basically don't. What they care about and what has serious scarcity value is the raw information that we publish, because it's, and our reputation for accuracy. So these things combined produce an undeniable reality. So when used in arguments, for example, as Zizek was pointing out, you can point to it directly there. It's quite good. You publish so much that when an event arises like this current dispute between Turkey and Qatar, sorry, between Saudi and Qatar, Turkey is also now involved, that we can go back and look at what we published in 2015 with the Saudi cables, or more recent material with Hillary Clinton's emails, or in the big cable sets we've published, that reveal that this new dispute is not new. I mean, it emerges from all sorts of regional power conflicts, from the internal tensions in Saudi Arabia, which have been dealt with by creating external enemies, from the use of Al Jazeera as a kind of a poor man's nuclear weapon, a poor man's deterrent by Qatar. Qatar's geographical positioning in relation to Saudi Arabia and so on. So it's, yeah. So I mean, the press speaks about WikiLeaks as if it's a scandal generator, and that it exposes certain people and harms them. But the way I have always seen the value of what we do is that WikiLeaks is a rebel library of Alexandria, where every book in it is accurate. It doesn't mean every phrase on every page is accurate, because governments write inaccurate things, but nonetheless, the books themselves are accurate. And that's as we have an informational cacophony, and everyone's able to give an opinion, what we need is some kind of firm scaffolding that you can rely on to build opinions and particular political movements and views. And that has to be some kind of library that you can trust about how the world actually works. That is something that exists independently of a particular political movement. It's something in a way that exists independently of the particular time that we're in, just as we can go back and look at very old books to understand afresh something about something about the time that we live in, because they were written prior to just this moment. So they were not written with an attempt to manipulate us in our understanding at precisely this moment. They're written about a slightly earlier a very ancient situation, or in the case of WikiLeaks, something that's a few weeks or a few years old.
I wanted to ask about AI again, just because we're running over anyway. So musicians who are sort of encouraged to obviously embrace AR technology and VR technology and AI technology, and it's being sold to us as something that is amazing, to become a hologram or have a 3D experience where you don't have to go out and do tours, and people could put headsets on and you'd be there in the room. Does that mean that in the future we're going to be more vulnerable to more sort of becoming apolitical? Is that a word? Like not basically not having any sort of malfunctioning human traits, so we could be easily squashed into a
well, you're asking, do new technologies that interface with our perceptions,
is it going to be connected
like
and
recording movies and so on, can we be influenced by these more than we could previously? Yes, of course we can. But I don't see that is the big problem for us as human beings. Human beings have always been influenced by sophisticated systems of production of information and experience. So BBC, for example. I mean, you kind of look at it and you think it was actually not that sophisticated, but when you think about the whole machine and all the parts coming together, is very sophisticated means of influencing the thoughts of human beings. Okay, and we have a variety of new perceptual technologies like VR and so on coming into play. Those just amplify the power of the ability to project into the mind. What I think is probably the most important development that is happening as far as the fate of human beings is concerned is that we are getting close to the threshold where the traditional propaganda function that is employed by, BBC, Daily Mail, et cetera, in cultures also, can be encapsulated by AI processes. Now, if you think about where you're playing chess, already we're in a situation where AI can do better than the human chess player. So you can see a certain number of moves ahead, and someone moves a piece onto the board, and you go, well, why did they put that knight there? And you start to think, what is the intentionality behind it? And then you try and look several steps ahead to work out what the intentionality was and then counter it. Okay, they want to manipulate me into moving here, so this will happen and so I will lose, okay? But actually, we take these considerations already when some of us, when we're reading stories in the press. What is the intentionality of this story? Why is this particular information being pushed to the public and not some other form of information? Who's the name of the author? What publication is it appearing in? What language, etc.? Well, possibly the reason was because someone wanted to promote a particular agenda. Well, therefore we should read it in a different light. But when you have artificial intelligence programs harvesting all the search queries that people have on their phones, all the YouTube videos that human beings have uploaded, etc. And it starts to lay out perceptual influence campaigns 20 to 30 moves ahead. This starts to become totally beneath the level of human perception. And once a computer augmented organization, such as Google, is able to engage in influencing human beings 20 to 30 moves ahead, keeping each move beneath the level of human perception, there's nothing we can do about it because we can't see it. So if you imagine how this would play out in practice, let's say Google wants to acquire some company in Russia or China or UK, and it wants to pay as low a price as possible to gain control over that company. So it starts to look at, well, who are the people who decide to sell shares? Or who are the regulatory administrators who will regulate how it's sold? Who are the people who work in it, who ultimately control it? Or the computer systems that power it and control parts. And so you can start to engage in a campaign of acquisition laid out to make each step beneath the level of human perception and look many moves ahead. And if you can do that more than others can do it, then you win, just like in chess. So that's where I think we're going in terms of politics. So what is, if you look at that kind of prediction of the future, we're all doomed from that viewpoint, because the reality becomes invisible. Reality becomes something that is unperceivable by us as individuals. Now, to a degree, of course, it already is. in many ways unperceivable. But the big changes about control, those become totally unperceivable. So is there any antidote to that? Maybe in the competition between these organizations, you might maybe have companies in China trying to do the same thing, backed also by the state. So there's a little bit of fratricide, if you like, between these two. But the most immediate way of generating capital from artificial intelligence is to sell access to it. So to sell access, just like Google sells access to Google search, how do they sell it? Well, you sell yourself. What you do is you sell what you wanted to search, and you sell your attention to Google by searching. That's surveillance capitalism. You give a little bit of your insight into who you are to Google by searching, and in exchange, all the resources that it has and its capacities you can use to get the result. Okay, so if Google has, insofar as it has a very serious increase in AI capacity, it can lease that AI capacity to other organizations to get knowledge about those other organizations in terms of surveillance capital flow, or just for money. It's a way of getting profit fast for Google. Then the question becomes, what are the various end states? So where in that dynamic of acquisition of capital, exchange of intelligence capacity, who ends up winning? Do you end up with basically a diversification, like is done to a degree with Google search, where every individual who has access to it is effectively ends up with something like the ability that the State Department once had. So you have access to enormous archives, mostly laterally produced around the world. Or do we move towards a situation where Google or an equivalent organization is able to acquire so much more in terms of capital flows, in terms of knowledge about how organizations are working, like collecting what they want to do with this AI capacity? Then you can end up with very, very substantial, very, very powerful organizations that are operating at a level beneath what human beings can perceive, and ultimately move into a situation where what human beings are interested in becomes totally irrelevant, because you have computerized organizations and manufacturing processes and automated transport flows, etc., which make human beings just inefficient and irrelevant. It's not like you have some nasty artificial intelligence that wants to decimate the world, but rather human beings become irrelevant and treated like we treat animals, in the irritating animals like moles, for example, that are getting in the way of our ability to use the land for something else. It's quite a dystopic vision. I don't want to, maybe there will be a new band of human beings, technologically empowered human beings, that can see this brewing fate coming towards us, that will be able to extract value or diminish it by directly engaging with it. It's also possible.
I was just wondering if Google is foreseen what might happen if they implement aggressive AI into people's lives, and if machines then start taking care of machines and we become irrelevant, then haven't they already thought of that?
Not really. I mean, they have a. If you look at this Corbyn situation. There's a key question. all those Blairites that were aggressively attacking Corbyn and, you know, their pals in the media, did they not perceive, or did they perceive that Corbyn wasn't in their interests, or is it both? Did they not perceive reality, that with a breakdown in media controls, that someone like Corbyn could get somewhere? Did they not perceive that? Or did they not want to perceive it because they believed that Corbyn wasn't one of them, and therefore there couldn't be any useful patronage extracted from him, and therefore they opposed him? Did they not perceive, or did they perceive that he was not in their interest, and therefore they worked against him? I think it's both, right? That if you perceive that not perceiving something is in your interest, then you can be very good at not perceiving it. So when we look at what's happening inside Silicon Valley and what's happening inside Google, there's the same type of deliberate lack of perception about what they're doing. Instead, they create a future Nirvana that will come from what they're doing. I mean, they genuinely believe, many engineers and people like Ray Kurzweil, it's kind of well known, but I know from our sources deep inside those Silicon Valley institutions, they genuinely believe that they're going to produce artificial intelligences that are so powerful relatively soon that people will have their brains digitized, uploaded to these artificial intelligences, and live forever in a simulation, therefore will have eternal life. It's a religion for atheists. They'll have eternal life, and given that you're in a simulation, why not program the simulation to have endless drug and sex orgy parties all around you? It's like the 72 virgins, but it's like the Silicon Valley equivalent. And what can you do with that? Well, what you can do with that is you can get smart engineers to work for less, because they're not just working to increase the profits of Google and Facebook. They're working towards constructing their own immortality and their own infinite pleasure, and not just for themselves, but for their whole community, and they perceive even for all of humanity itself. That's the vision that they have that makes them work harder. And the dystopian consequences of their work is not what is most present in their mind. They are aware of the talk, but they engage in rhetorical strawmans. So they take the talk about, okay, well, maybe producing artificial intelligence that is so sophisticated that human beings can't understand what it's doing is a dangerous thing. And they reframe it into some ridiculous straw man. One day, computer becomes conscious, it decides it's a homicidal maniac and goes around killing everyone. Or we can just put a little switch on it that, you know, secondary computer program that looks to see where it's becoming homicidal turns it off. Of course you could, but that's not how it will happen in practice. In practice, these artificial intelligences become into being the same way that children become into being, or rather adults become into being, through the process of being children. Learning about the world. They are learning machines. The children learn 10 words a day on average, and many other things. So they have intense capacity, but they're not pre-distilled with everything in their brain. They harvest from the world. Now, us as human beings have been extremely foolish. Surveillance capitalism as a model has meant that we've all been in the process of putting our lives onto the internet or Facebook. We're giving our lives over to these Silicon Valley companies. So these Silicon Valley data stores now have a very, very rich description of reality as experienced by human beings, and some bits of data that's not experienced by human beings, like stock market indexes and so on. And that is what these artificial intelligences are trained on. If you look at something like Google Translate, that's amazing. I mean, it's pretty hard to learn, 8 languages, let alone 65 languages. That's really remarkable. The field of artificial intelligence used to be called AIMT, Artificial Intelligence Machine Translation. This machine translation was basically to tap into funding streams from the National Security Agency because they had to translate all their intercepts. But the machine translation part is basically done. How did that happen? Was it tens of thousands of programmers making lots of grammar rules from all sorts of different languages? No, the breakthrough is it's looking at translations of UN speeches and EU regulations. And there's language pairs, many language pairs of the same document. And with that examples, those Rosetta Stones, millions of Rosetta Stones, you're able to construct a computer which can learn the principles of language and therefore translate. And what we have done is given Rosetta Stones the keys to how human beings think and our how we manage our political structures and our social structures and our language structures, visual and word examples in the trillions. So that's all there. The full description of humanity is all there in all its beauty, horror, and detail. It's all there to be gleaned from and learned from and extracted like an open-cut mine. And you just need to construct, various types of artificial intelligence are being constructed that then simply mine this out, the collective digitized experience of humanity. And so
but you can't get
so each iteration that you have, you produce a 1% better artificial intelligence. It's able to then extract more from this collective output of humanity. It's able to go through the same information and extract more. So if you look at the improvements in the algorithms and computational speed, it's running about 400, 500% a year. The computational speed about 200% a year, and the algorithms, another 200-300% a year. So that's a geometric increase. It's a graph that looks like this. Even if we're not putting in more data to the internet, and we are, just that alone allows you to extract more intelligence, understanding, capital from the collective digitized output of humanity. So it's a really quite severe situation, and it's not properly seen by the people who have the best capacity to see it, i.e. the people who are working on it themselves. They don't perceive it because there's a cultural and industrial bias to not perceiving it, and instead to supplant what would normally be perception of what you're working on with this ridiculous quasi-religious model that it's all going to lead to Nirvana.